November 2013, Emirates placed an order for 50 additional Airbus A380. This was not the original order. Emirates had already been operating a Basha mouse for 6 years by this point. It had already bought 90 of them. It was now buying 50 more. The total commitment, at list prices, now exceeded $40 billion. For context, the entire market capitalization of many mid-sized airlines is less than $5 billion. Emirates had just committed, cumulatively, to a single aircraft type at 8 times that amount. And here is what made the announcement remarkable, beyond the sheer scale. Every other airline in the world that had bought a Basha mouse was trying to figure out how to exit gracefully. Singapore Airlines was downgrading its Basha routes and shifting capacity to smaller twin-engine aircraft. Lufthansa was being careful not to expand its Basha commitments. Air France was operating its Basha fleet without enthusiasm. Qantas had taken delivery of its 12 aircraft and stopped there. But Emirates was going back for more. In total, by the time the program closed, Emirates had purchased Yaoarsen Airbus A Basha Ba. Exactly 49% of every AC Basher ever built. An airline that most of the world had never heard of when the Basha was launched had become the only reason the aircraft was manufactured at all. The question is not why Emirates bought so many Basha mouse. The question is what Emirates understood about its own business that every other airline in the world got wrong. The Basha mouse story begins in the late 1990s with one of commercial aviation's most consequential strategic disagreements. Airbus believed that the future of long-haul aviation was the superhub. Passengers would aggregate at massive airports, fly in enormous aircraft, and disperse from a small number of global connection points. Boeing believed the opposite. The future was point-to-point, with efficient twin-engine aircraft connecting mid-sized cities directly, eliminating the hub. Both projections were grounded in genuine market analysis. Both turned out to be partially correct. The difference was which one you needed to be right about. To justify the Bashu, Airbus spent approximately billion developing the Bashu, an investment that required the aircraft to sell at least 420 units to break even. This was an already ambitious target. The business case required a future in which airports like Dubai, Singapore, and London became ever more dominant as global interchange points, concentrating traffic in ways that justified filling 500-seat aircraft twice daily. Airbus's models suggested this would happen. The world's major hubs would hit their runway and terminal capacity limits. Demand would concentrate at the constrained airports, and airlines operating high-frequency, large-capacity aircraft would outcompete carriers relying on smaller, point-to-point jets. The model was not wrong in its mechanics. It was wrong in its universality. It described Dubai very accurately. It did not describe Paris, Frankfurt, or Sydney with the same precision. Dubai International Airport's traffic composition is unlike any other major hub in the world. At most large airports, the dominant traffic flow is origination and destination traffic. Passengers who live near the airport or whose final destination is near the airport. At Heathrow, roughly 67% of passengers are origin-destination travelers. At Frankfurt, the figure is similar. These passengers are flying because they want to be at Heathrow or Frankfurt, or because they live within the catchment area of those airports. Connecting traffic, passengers transiting through the hub on their way to somewhere else, represents a minority. At Dubai, the proportions are inverted. A very large share of Dubai's traffic is connecting traffic. Passengers using DXB as a transit point between origins and destinations that have no natural direct routing through the Gulf. A passenger traveling from Nigeria to the Philippines, from South Africa to India, from Eastern Europe to Australia might logically connect through Dubai because the frequency and timing of Emirates' connections makes it genuinely competitive against the alternatives. Dubai is one of the few cities on Earth where this aggregation works at sufficient scale to fill large aircraft continuously rather than intermittently. This structural characteristic of Dubai's traffic meant that Emirates could consistently generate the load factors that the Bashi's economics required. When you connect passengers from 30 different origin cities onto a single aircraft bound for a hub like London Heathrow, you need those 30 different origin flows to each be large enough to contribute meaningfully. Dubai's geographic position at the intersection of African, South Asian, Middle Eastern, and Australian travel routes means that those 30 origin flows exist and are large. No European hub and no Asian hub has quite the same geometric advantage. The financial investment that Emirates made in the Al Basher program extends well beyond the aircraft purchase price. The airline commissioned extraordinarily expensive cabin interiors. A signature lounge and shower spa in the first-class section became one of the most widely discussed aircraft features in commercial aviation. The onboard bar in business class, an amenity that exists nowhere else at commercial scale, became a defining marketing image. Emirates invested hundreds of millions of dollars in these interiors, calculated on the thesis that passengers would pay significantly above market fares to access a product that no other airline offered. The thesis proved correct. Emirates' Basha routes consistently achieved load factors and yield premiums above the airline's network average. Passengers on routes where Emirates offered an Bashi were in sufficient numbers, choosing Emirates specifically because of the aircraft, not just the price, not just the schedule, but the physical product. The shower spa in first class is not a profit center on its own. It is a marketing mechanism that generates premium fare premiums on the entire cabin across hundreds of flights over decades. When capitalized properly, the investment in the product returns a multiple of its cost. The full reckoning for the Al Basher investment came during COVID. Shujio, the entire Emirates Al Basha fleet, all Yo-Yo aircraft then in service, was grounded in March Lansanding Arsher. For a period of several months, the largest commercial aircraft in the world sat parked in rows at Al Maktoum International Airport, engines covered, cabins sealed, their interiors not generating a dollar of revenue, while Emirates continued to pay the financing costs on their acquisition. Emirates disclosed losses of $5.5 billion for the 2020 to 2021 financial year, losses driven primarily by the grounding of the aircraft, around which it had built its entire long-haul network. The question that was asked by aviation analysts, by competitors, and by some observers inside the airline industry was whether the COVID experience would change Emirates' relationship with the Bashu, whether the airline would conclude that the aircraft's high unit costs and inability to operate on thinner routes made it a strategic liability in a world where demand and uncertainty was higher than previously assumed. The answer was unambiguous. Emirates began reactivating its own Basha fleet faster than almost anyone expected. Within 2 years of the pandemic's worst impact, the entire fleet was back in service. Emirates publicly confirmed plans to continue operating the Al Ba into the Lansanding Senchamaus and to invest in refurbishing the cabins of its existing fleet rather than accelerating retirement. In 2024, Emirates signed an agreement with Airbus for a potential reopening of the Basher production line, or at minimum, for Airbus to study the feasibility of restarting production to allow Emirates to order additional new-build aircraft. Airbus's public response was cautious. The economics of restarting a production line that closed after 251 aircraft for an aircraft whose development cost $25 billion and whose part supply chain has been substantially wound down are deeply challenging. But the conversation itself is revealing. Emirates is not managing the Bashi toward an exit. Emirates is managing it toward the next generation. The COVID-19 Pasakan endemic provided the most severe test the Al Basha commitment had ever faced. In April, Lansanding Arsher, Emirates parked all Yoyosan of its operational AC-1 Basha mess, the largest simultaneous grounding of a single aircraft type by a single airline in aviation history. The images of Emirates, a Basha mouse, lined up across the Al Maktoum International ramp, row after row, in the desert sun were circulated globally as symbols of the pandemic's devastation of aviation. For a brief period, the question being asked in earnest by aviation analysts was whether the pandemic would provide Emirates with the justification and the financial need to retire its A380 fleet early and pivot to a more flexible, twin-engine operation. The question revealed a misunderstanding of Emirates' situation. The airline's A380 fleet was not just a collection of aircraft that Emirates happened to operate. It was the physical expression of its entire commercial strategy. The hardware that made the Dubai hub's specific transfer geometry and capacity model work. Retiring the A380 without a replacement, capable of carrying equivalent passengers on the same routes, would have required Emirates to fundamentally restructure its network, reduce its Dubai hub's throughput, and sacrifice the transfer traffic margins that the entire model depended on. There was no aircraft announced Arshur that could substitute for the A380 at scale on Emirates' specific routes. The A380 is exceptional, but carries Senbai to Senbai-Liushi, Pasca Sengers. The 777X that Emirates had on order carries up to 426. The I-Basher carries up to Liuyawu in a high-density configuration, and Emirates' own layout carried 484 in its three-class format. The capacity step down from an A380 to any available twin-engine alternative was not manageable within Emirates' existing route and scheduling framework without structural network changes. So, Emirates waited. It managed its cash through the shutdown. It maintained its engineering workforce. It preserved its A380 maintenance capability. And when travel demand recovered, faster in the premium international segment than in the domestic short-haul segment that initially led the recovery, Emirates was positioned to reactivate the aircraft and meet the demand that returned. No other airline on Earth could have bought Yoarsen, A380, and been right. The aircraft's commercial viability is not a function of the aircraft's design. It is a function of where you operate it, who connects through your hub, what premium your product commands, and what structural cost advantages your government ownership provides. Emirates had all of those conditions. Every other airline that bought a A380 had some of them. None had all of them. The A380 did not make Emirates successful. Emirates was already the right airline in the right city, with the right business model. The A380 was simply the tool that fit the model. And in outstanding RCC, when Emirates was holding conversations with Airbus about potentially restarting a Saubasha production for new build orders. That conversation was not nostalgia. It was the logical continuation of a strategy that has paid off every year since the first aircraft arrived in Dubai in 2008. The rest of the industry called the A380 a mistake for 20 years. Emirates called it a competitive advantage. The financial results, year after year, suggest that Emirates